One gold medal. That's what I thought about since 1992, the year I realized I could swim. Every time reporters ask me about tying or breaking Mark Spitzer's record of 7 gold medals at one Olympics, I keep reminding them that it was my dream to win one gold medal. Maybe that's why I couldn't shut my eyes that afternoon. My dream was in front of me, hours away. There are times in my sleep when I literally dream my race from start to finish. Other nights, when I'm about to fall asleep, I visualize to the point that I know exactly what I want to do. Dive, glide, stroke, flip, reach the wall, hit the split time to the 100th, then swim back again for as many times as I need to finish the race. It's pretty vivid the first time I do it, but eventually it puts me to sleep as if I'm counting sheep. But 2 hours of visualization? Know what happens when you stare at a ceiling for 2 hours? It's the same ceiling. Get me out of here. I want to swim again. This is an excerpt from the book we're going to talk about today, Beneath the Surface by Michael Phelps and Brian Casanueve.
Welcome to Performers, the podcast that takes you into the minds of the world's most extraordinary athletes, coaches and performers. We're your hosts. I'm Dr. Greg Young, and you've just heard from Dr. Duncan Simpson. And as sports psychology experts, we'll guide you through the pages of their autobiographies, revealing the mindsets, strategies and habits that propelled the world's best to the pinnacle of their fields. Each episode represents over 20 hours of our expert analysis, condensing entire autobiographies into concentrated insights. You'll not only gain the collective wisdom of these elite performers, but also access to over 30 years of our professional expertise in sports psychology. Listening to this, you're saving countless hours while accessing the distilled wisdom and proven strategies of the best in their fields. On Performers, we help you connect their life-changing lessons with your personal and professional goals, offering you an accelerated path to personal excellence. Duncan, what are our listeners going to get out of this episode?
In this episode of Performers, you'll learn the power of visualization and discover how visualization techniques can mentally prepare you for challenges. Gain insights into emotional resilience, understand the importance of balancing vulnerability with strength, and you'll explore the value of persistence and dedication. Greg, some good news for Performers. We are expanding internationally, and I want to give a shout out to some new listeners in some new countries: Peru, Romania, Kenya, Zimbabwe, Namibia, Israel, and of course we have a few in the US and Canada.
Well, welcome aboard to our new listeners. But Duncan, before we dive in, I want to quickly highlight a podcast that I think our listeners, including those new ones, will definitely appreciate. If you're fascinated by the mental aspects of sport performance, like we are, you might want to check out 80% Mental, hosted by Dr. Peter Olashuga. This podcast is a goldmine for athletes, for coaches, sports psychology enthusiasts, or really any other sports fan. Dr. Pete and his guests unpack crucial questions about the psychological underpinnings of sport performance. They feature a variety of performers from different fields, and that enhances the discussion by showing how the principles that they talk about can be applied across different disciplines. For anyone eager to enhance their mental game both in sports and in life, 80% Mental it's a must listen for me. I'll include a link in the show notes for everyone's easy access.
So Greg, on to today's performer. Now, Michael Phelps' list of accomplishments is simply ridiculous, but here are just a few selections and some are just mind-blowing. When it comes to swimming, there really is no peer. He is undoubtedly the GOAT. So, Olympic achievements. A total of 28 Olympic medals, making him the most decorated Olympian of all time. Out of those 28, 23 are gold medals. 23 gold medals. At the age of 15, Phelps was the youngest male swimmer to represent the US at an Olympics since 1932. At the 2008 Beijing Olympics, he set an Olympic record by winning 8 gold medals in a single games, surpassing Mark Spitzer's record of 7 golds from the 1972 Munich Olympics. He has accumulated 82 medals in major international long course competitions, which includes 65 golds. That is across Olympics, World Championships, and Pan-Pacific Championships. World records. Michael Phelps set 39 world records throughout his career, including 29 individual records, 10 relay records. The number is higher than any other swimmer recognized by FINA, the international governing body of swimming. At 15 years and 9 months, he set the world record in the 200 butterfly, becoming the youngest male ever to set a swimming world record. Whoa, and Just a few more. He won World Swimming of the Year just 8 times and American Swimmer of the Year 11 times. He was Sports Illustrated Person of the Year in 2008, Associated Press Athlete of the Year in 2008, and 2012. Quite the list.
Quite the list. I wouldn't be happy if I was the person having to keep his medal cabinet clean.
So we're going to get going, and this is really into his childhood. He says, my mum knew she'd have her hands full from the moment I was born on June 30th, 1985. At 9 pounds 6 ounces, I was probably destined to run her into the ground. I can't say I was accident prone as a child because a lot of things happened without my control. Other things happened because I was restless and had to get into everything. Whatever it was, if it was breakable, I usually found it. So let's just say I was incident prone. I simply could never sit still. I made faces at cameras, answered questions with questions, and climbed on things that weren't meant for climbing. I was a hyperactive kid who loved being with his friends and family, but still caused trouble for everyone. So a little bit about his parents and their background. He says they both earned education degrees. Mum became a home economics teacher. Dad was a state police officer. Neither of my parents were swimmers. Mum was always the one with irrefutable logic and unconditional love. She taught school kids about health and nutrition and was twice voted Maryland State Teacher of the Year. His dad, became a sergeant who would spend almost 3 decades on the force before working as an independent security officer. And there's a kind of a crucial moment in his upbringing, and he says, the year I turned 7, 2 things happened that would change my life. I walked into my parents' room at our old house at Chesapeake Avenue one day. My mom had a very sad look on her face, and my sisters were crying. Michael, my mom said, I need to tell you something. I don't know if I ever heard the words separation or divorce before. I heard my mom explain to me that my dad really wasn't going to be living with us anymore, but that didn't make sense. As I began to grasp that my dad would be away for a long time, I needed something that would grab my attention. My mum had started Hillary and Whitney in swimming because our family physician, Dr. Charles Wax, had convinced her that she should introduce her kids to water safety. So, Greg, a little bit of background there. This is a seminal moment for Michael. His parents are getting separated. His mum is left with 3 kids, Michael and his 2 older sisters, and Michael is a hyperactive child. And I can't help but think his mum is looking for something to occupy him out of necessity, probably, and swimming just ends up being that thing.
I love the line, I was incident prone. That sounds like trouble seems to find his. But I also like the idea that the family physician was introducing them to water safety early, and it seemed like a natural way to channel that energy. The old saying goes, the devil makes work for idle hands, and I think that's exactly what his mother's trying to do here. Take that energy that he's got, that he's undoubtedly got, and trying to channel it into something that's going to be useful. And it sounds like combining sort of physical fitness and physical activity with that idea of water safety might be a good way to go.
So for someone who ended up with 23 gold medals, you'd think it'd be a duck to water. But here's Michael's early introduction. He says, you would think that on my first day I hit the water, I just sort of turned into a dolphin and never wanted to leave the pool. No way. I hated it. We're talking screaming, kicking, fit throwing, goggle tossing hate. It wasn't anything like I expected. No luck. That's your problem, Michael Phelps. Your mum wants you to learn how to swim, so you're going to learn to swim. But I don't want to get my face wet. I raised a screaming stink about it. Miss Kathy was one of many people who were determined to get the best out of me, no matter how difficult I made it for her. I don't remember how long it took for this flailing to turn into swimming, or how many lessons it took me to turn over onto my stomach and work on my Australian crawl. But once I figured out how to swim, I felt so free. It was like I had this new toy that my sisters enjoyed all the time. I went to the pool every day, and it usually took a while to get me to leave. I had grown up around the pool so much, and the more I swam, the more it became part of me, and the more I wanted to get back. I don't remember my first race. People find that hard to believe, but before we had age group races, club races, zone meets, national meets, international events, and of course the Olympics, there was probably some small informal race that kick-started my career, but I don't remember it as much as I remember loving the water. Greg, It's fascinating to hear how even the greatest champions started their journey with reluctance and some resistance. I think this is a powerful story and a powerful reminder that sometimes initial struggles and discomfort can actually be the foundation of some really great passions and achievements. Greg, what do you think this says about the role of perseverance and support in uncovering one's true potential and not giving up?
Well, those two things are absolutely critical, perseverance and support. And Phelps' story shows that having someone who believes in you, like Miss Kathy, and pushing through the initial discomfort can lead to incredible growth and success. Sometimes that first step is the hardest thing to overcome, but once you get that first step, it can be a lot easier from there. It's often, during the most challenging times that we develop the resilience and the skills needed to excel. When things are going well, it's not that hard to fight through those moments. On the flip side, you could argue that maybe forcing someone to continue with something that they hate, that might not always lead to success. It could also lead to burnout or maybe even a deep-seated aversion to the activity itself. So maybe Michael was an exception, and for many, finding a path that they're naturally passionate about from the start, that might be more beneficial in the long term.
So as Michael mentioned, he spent many an hour around the pool deck with his sisters, and there's a culture in swimming, and he says, people in swimming made me feel I could fit in. That was important because even though I had a lot of friends at school, some things could make me pretty sensitive. I'm not sure it was because of my big ears or short attention span, but I always appreciated people who were patient and supportive, and I always identified with underdogs. My third grade teacher, Barbara Kynes, was one of the people who really encouraged me, telling me I had an active personality that was healthy for young boys. Instead of always telling me what to do, she often asked me what I liked to do. So Greg, his experience highlights the profound impact that a supportive community and understanding individuals can have on someone dealing with insecurities and social challenges. It shows that feeling accepted and valued can significantly influence one's confidence and self-esteem, especially during those formative years.
Yes, these definitely are formative years, and this has likely played a crucial role in building his resilience, as we mentioned before, and a sense of identity. Having a safe space where he can feel accepted, allowing him to focus on his strengths and develop a positive self-image. We saw shades of that with Alex Honnold as well in the climbing community. But this kind of encouragement can be incredibly empowering, helping him as an individual to overcome his insecurities and essentially go on and thrive. However, you could also argue that relying too much on external validation might not always be beneficial. It's possible that without these supportive figures, Michael might have struggled even more with his self-esteem. So you could say that developing inner resilience independent of external support can be really important in and of itself, as it prepares individuals to face challenges on their own and as an independent actor.
So Greg, a little bit more about his personality. He says, I simply couldn't sit still. Because it was difficult for me to focus on one thing at a time, when I was in 6th grade, Dr. Wax diagnosed me with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, a condition that afflicts roughly 2 million elementary school children who seem hyperactive, inattentive, and impulsive. ADHD can be pretty serious. Some kids who have it have related learning problems such as dyslexia. Others become antisocial and don't try to make friends. Others suffer from severe depression. I was lucky that none of those things happened to me, but Dr. Wax wasn't taking any chances. He prescribed the medication called Ritalin. It helped me control the condition. At first, my mom didn't tell me what it was or what it was supposed to do, but I did notice that it calmed me down and made me less jumpy in class. Once I became used to the drill, it wasn't really a big deal, but the medication didn't solve everything. Greg, research suggests ADHD is actually common amongst elite athletes more than the general population, up to 8% of elite athletes compared to 2% of the general population. So while ADHD brings many challenges, as Phelps kind of alluded to, and I don't want to glorify the condition, but perhaps sports offers a healthy outlet for managing these symptoms.
Yeah, there's some interesting elements to ADHD, and again, not my field of expertise by any stretch, but some things I find interesting. ADHD itself can actually cause hyperfocus, which is a state of intense or very prolonged concentration. So people with ADHD might become so engrossed in the activity that they're doing that they lose track of time and surroundings, actually also a little bit like flow that we've talked about in the previous episodes. So this can be a positive thing in helping someone stay focused on a task until it's complete, particularly if they enjoy that task. However, it can also make it difficult to manage how much time they actually spend on certain activities. So someone with ADHD might actually spend hours reading a book that they enjoy, but have trouble focusing on homework. So I think sport and this outlet that's been provided through swimming for Michael Phelps, I think this can definitely serve as a healthy outlet for the hyper focus that can come as sort of part and parcel of ADHD.
As we've seen with many of our performers, there's a moment in each of our performers' journey when a coach comes into their life that really impacts them and sends them in a different direction. And if you know anything about Michael Phelps, you'll have heard the name Coach Bob Bauman. So a little bit about Bob Bauman, his coach. Bob had actually been a very good swimmer himself. Greg, he'd been on a scholarship at FSU. And interestingly, and I think this will play in later, he also studied child psychology. He quit competing after his junior year and really went into coaching. And he had several coaching jobs and bounced around different aquatics club. And he hadn't quite found his spot. So he decided to leave coaching to pursue a degree in farm management, of all things, at Auburn University. And he was planning to run a horse farm. But a timely job offer from Murray Stevens at NBAC, which is North Baltimore Athletics Club, with a significantly higher salary, brought him back into coaching just before the Atlanta Olympics. So those sliding doors moments again. Coach Bob Bauman was about to leave the sport of swimming, and just timely he gets this offer to go back and ultimately ends up at the club where Michael Phelps is. So a little bit about Michael's first impression of Coach Bauman. He says, I didn't know what to make of Bob Bauman at first, but I remember I couldn't put anything past him. If he told 20 of us to swim 10 laps at different intervals and I only swam 9, he called me on it. If he asked us to show up at the top of the hour and I arrived at 5:01, he'd be at the front door to ask why. If I splashed a teammate when he wasn't looking, those eyes in the back of Bob's head would let him know, and he would be sure to let me know that he knew. Bob scared me. Bob and I didn't seem like a good match at all. I was a goofball and he was a taskmaster. I did without thinking, he thought before doing. Bob also saw me making improvements, lowering my times in meets and practices. He also knew that I rarely got tired, and if someone could just push the right buttons with me, they could push me pretty far in the right direction, even one day to the Olympics. In October, Bob called a meeting with my mom and dad to confide some of his projections with them. Bob was very frank about my talents, my attitude, my inconsistent focus, and my dueling moments of indifference and determination. He also said that I had a realistic opportunity other kids didn't have. Bob talked to them about where they were planning to send me to high school, what my hours might look like in a typical day, and what sort of sacrifices we would have to make in order for me to be the best swimmer I could be. Greg, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
It feels like we're going over old ground again because we've had this crop up so many times with so many different performers. But Bowman's ability to recognise Phelps' unique talents and push him in the right direction, despite their obviously contrasting personalities, highlights the real value of disciplined guidance and long-term vision in achieving greatness in athletics or any performance realm. The relationship that they've got, I think, underscores the idea that effective mentorship can involve balancing that idea of strict accountability with an understanding of the mentee's strengths and weaknesses. So it seems like a little bit of a give and take here. They've both got their part to play.
Absolutely. And at that time, Michael's also, because he's so hyperactive, he's in a lot of different sports. But of course, there comes a time in perhaps every performer's life where there has to be that moment of commitment to one singular performance or performance domain, as it were. And he says, it was a huge commitment for a number of reasons. First of all, that kind of dedication meant that I would have to start gradually sacrificing my time playing other sports in order to focus on swimming. That would be rough. I loved other sports and I had the bruises and trophies to prove it. I didn't take Ritalin on Saturdays because I had so many outlets for my energy release. I'd go for a lacrosse game, to a baseball game, to swim practice. That was a blast. I played 3 sports with 3 different sets of rules and goals. If that didn't make me tired, I'd usually come home, eat, and shoot baskets with Matt. The balance of sports was a saving grace for a mother's son, and it was hard to disrupt that balance. But if my parents needed a reason to think twice about having one of their children focus so intensely on swimming, they only needed to think about what happened to my sister, Whitney. So, Greg, we're going to explain about Whitney and her swimming situation. But there comes a time, as I mentioned, in most performers' career path where they must specialize in one domain. The time commitment to be really exceptional in one area often leaves little time for other things. You can have it all, but you can't have it all at once.
I think that's the unfortunate thing when it comes to specialization. Of course, that is usually going to be the path towards peak performances, putting all of your effort, all of your energy, all of your attention into one singular focus, which is usually the path to greatness, essentially, in this case. But as we've talked about on a number of different episodes as well, the idea of sacrifices is a common theme with these performers that we're talking about. And it seems that this is the necessary step to be able to become a specialist, to be able to become an expert, to be able to become a master of the field. And that might be something that we see consistent across a lot more performers that to come.
Yeah, excellent breakdown with regard to specialization. And as I referenced a little bit about Whitney, his sister, now, she was a really accomplished swimmer herself, and she gained kind of recognition. She was tagged as the future star of US swimming herself. Unfortunately, she had chronic back issues, which really started at the age of 9, so very early, which hampered her progress. She had a lot of pain, and she slowly developed over time an eating disorder, which worsened over time without herself and actually others realizing it. Despite Whitney's health issues, she actually competed in the 96 Olympic trials, where she qualified for the finals of the US Olympic trials in the 200 fly and finished 6th. But after the trials, she had to stop swimming to address severe back pain, which was later diagnosed as 2 bulging discs and a stress fracture. So, Greg, after all that Whitney had to overcome with chronic injuries as well as an eating disorder, here is Coach Bob telling her family that another member of the Phelps family is good enough to make a run at the Olympics. You could see how this is an incredibly difficult decision for his parents.
I'm sure it was, and it really highlights the level of trust that they've got in Bob as a coach and as a almost a protector, because you certainly don't want the same thing or anything similar to happen to another member of your family.
Absolutely. And something else is going on kind of on the family side. He's drifting apart from his dad. Obviously, he doesn't live with his dad. And he's very close to his mom. As you've probably seen, she's always in the stands. And he says, I can only think of one time when I really tried to override her. It was 7th grade and I was fed up with having to take Ritalin. I looked at it as a crutch and I didn't need to be slinking off to the nurse anymore. This wasn't coming from anyone else. This was me. I wanted to be rid of it. Mom, I really want to do this. I need to do it. It's time. On my mum's face, I saw a combination of concern and pride. Inside, I knew how much she wanted me to take this step too. We spoke to Dr. Wax about it, and he gradually started weaning me off the medication. The crutch was gone, and I had learned what it was like to set a goal that was difficult to achieve and win. So, Greg, this comes at a time, and I don't know if it's simply coincidence, but he has some serious training goals with his swimming, which is ultimately where he channels all his focus. And he feels like he doesn't need the Ritalin anymore. Swimming is allowing him to focus.
That's one of the huge benefits of setting goals. It provides a direction for that intense energy and the intense effort that you have. It's kind of linked to motivation as well a little bit. But once you've got that clarity of purpose and you know exactly what it is that you want to achieve and essentially the steps to get there, that can take care of this focus stuff. And it might well just simply be a coincidence that as he comes off the medication and has these really specific and serious training goals, it might just be a question of timing. But I think that for anyone looking to really maximize their focus, setting some really specific and somewhat lofty goals can be a really good way to harness and focus your attention.
And there's a bit about the coaching here, and I know you've got a real expertise in coach education. Training went well that fall and winter. Bob had reached into his bag of tricks to improve every one of my strokes. One day, Bob had me train in sneakers. Other days, I'd either swim while tethered to a pulley, while wearing a scuba vest, or with an inner tube around my ankles. The weights on swimmers would make them feel easier once the weights were gone. The variety kept it interesting and challenging. So, Greg, I know you're a big fan of constraints-based coaching, which can be applied to actually many performance domains.
What I really like here, and is a key benefit for me from constraints-based coaching, is that last line. The variety kept it interesting and challenging. And that, for me, is key when it comes to coaching. Can you keep it interesting? Can you keep it challenging? And variety and variability is a great way to do that. Because really what you're doing is training performers to be problem solvers. So these constraints can simulate difficult conditions, forcing, in this instance, Michael to develop strategies and skills that he might not otherwise need. And once those constraints are removed, the athlete often finds their performance enhanced under those quote unquote normal conditions. And as the training's prepared them to handle a variety of different scenarios with greater ease and confidence, that's usually what we see when they're sort of unleashed in the regular performance environment. But I love the idea of keeping things fun, keeping things interesting, keeping things challenging. And in a nutshell, constraints-based coaching is, can you do something with either the environment, with the task, or with the learner themselves that forces them to be problem solvers and forces them to figure things out by themselves?
Greg, that's such a great breakdown. What I loved about that section was I think what you just shared could be really applied to any performance domain. So stop, rewind, have a listen, absolute gold in there. Now, there's a key point in Michael's career, and I think Bob's recognizing, look, things are going to change. And he says, Debbie, when we get back from Seattle, we should sit down and talk. Why, Bob? What's wrong? Nothing is wrong at all. In fact, it's good. But it's a matter of time before things start to change for Michael, and nothing is going to be the same. What do you mean? He's way ahead of schedule right now, and at some point, I don't know when, we're going to need to get ready for media attention, hype, and expectation. He'll need to prepare for that, and it'll be on us sooner than we think. Somewhere in the back of Bob's mind was the remote possibility that I could finish in the top 2 at trials in Indianapolis 5 months later and qualify for the Olympics at 15. So as Bob predicted, Michael goes to Seattle and he breaks all sorts of US age group records. And on the return, Michael and his mom are sat down and his mom says, Bob, do you realize what he just accomplished? Debbie, this is like step 180 in a 10,000 step process. We're just getting started here. Bob asked my mom for help in not letting people get too excited and in keeping people's expectations in check. He decreed that nobody around Meadowbrook could say the word Olympic in my presence. So Michael is here, Greg, starting to get national attention, and Bob is doing everything he can to downplay kind of the internal and external expectations. Isn't this what great coaches do? They often provide that shield for their athletes.
For sure. It's interesting because we've talked in previous episodes about athletes transitioning out of their sport as high performers. This almost seems like the exact opposite, like having a plan for transitioning into the highest levels of sport, which I really like. But as you said, great coaches do often act as a buffer between their athletes and the external world. And by carefully managing the expectations and shielding Michael from undue pressure here, I think this is a really good plan.
So 5 months later, there's the Olympic trials, and a little bit about the Olympic trials for those that are not too familiar. I know we've competed in a lot of Olympic trials ourselves.
None of them for swimming, I might have.
So the Olympic trials are not for the faint of heart. In years past, it used to be that countries could send 3 swimmers per individual event to the games. But in part because the US teams were so strong, the International Olympic Committee voted to reduce the number to 2 per international event. You can measure the margin of error on your fingernail. Gary Hall Jr., a 3-time Olympian, once compared the stress levels at the 2 events by saying, if I'm 3rd at the Olympics, it means I'm on the medal stand in a few minutes. If I'm 3rd at the trials, it means I'm on a couch for a month. So for context for the listeners, US swimming is so strong that the reality is that if you qualified for the US Olympic team in swimming in those top 2 spots, you're more than likely a contender for an Olympic medal. So Michael comes second and qualifies for his first Olympics, which is Sydney 2000, in the 200-meter fly. He makes it through to the Olympic final, and this is a little bit about his preparation before the Olympic final. Bob was outwardly calm, and we shortened our warm-up to get me ready. I was jittery as I walked to the blocks, so instead of stretching behind my lane, I walked over to wish Tom luck behind his lane. Swimmers don't usually do that, and I'm not sure what I was thinking. I guess I was living in the atmosphere and blowing off nervous energy. I was kind of scared, to tell you the truth. I told Tom, let's go baby, we can do this. It was more signs of nerves than sportsmanship. I swam a good race. Just as I'd hoped, I lowered my personal best time to 1:56.50, but I never quite caught up to the leaders. Tom won the race in 1:55.35. I was fifth, 0.33 seconds behind the bronze medalist. So, for context, he finishes fifth in his first Olympics as a 15-year-old. And crazy stat, this is also the last time that he wouldn't win a medal at the Olympics. So, Greg, he's performed really well, but I think just before the final, he's showing a little bit of inexperience. I know he's only 15, but he doesn't quite know how to handle the situation.
Duncan, two things about experience. Experience is what you get when you don't get what you want, and experience gives a test first and a lesson second.
Ain't that the truth? So, post Sydney 2000, we have a little bit about Michael and his kind of goal setting mindset here. It says Bob had been riding world record on almost every note that he left for me since the Olympic swim in Sydney. I hadn't won a medal there, and that drove me for the next 6 months. I was grabbing for a goal. I needed a goal the way a car needs fuel. I desperately wanted to break a world record, to make a statement that I had arrived, to validate the work we'd put in. Now, Michael's key event was the 200 fly, and he says, for a split second, I just floated, squinting through my goggles to make sure I saw the numbers right. Then I went spazzo. I started flapping my arms like a bird trying to shake bubblegum off its wings. I was on top of the world thinking, nobody has ever done that race faster than you. That's awesome. At 15, I became the youngest person ever to hold a world record, breaking the standard set by Ian Thorpe when he lowered the 200 freestyle world record in 1999 at 16 years, 10 months. It was the first swim that really meant something. Greg, a world record at 15 is quite something.
It certainly is. That is quite the achievement. And what I think we find with Michael Phelps is it really shows that he's planting a flag and wants to kick on from here, not satisfied with the success.
Absolutely. And a couple of years later, they're going to the World Championships in Japan, and he qualified third in the semi-finals of the 200 fly, but it was a poor race for Michael. Obviously, he was the world record holder at the time. And he says, after I got out of the pool, he really got on my case. I didn't realize Bob was being strategic. It worked. Afterward, I knew I had work to do, but I couldn't wait to get back in the water to do it. I was ready to attack the water and to prove to Bob and everyone that I could race on the world stage against the best swimmers and just conquer everyone. I charged through the first 50 and turned first, 0.83 seconds ahead of my world record pace. I'd never done that in a big meet. I turned first at the next two walls and touched the last one at 1:54.58. For the first time in my life, I was a world champion. I was on top of the world, and Bob was a genius. My world record had actually been only the second. The first was broken in the men's 400 meter freestyle by Ian Thorpe, the 17-year-old from Australia who was his country's national hero and who was clearly recognized as the best swimmer in the world. Ian had won 5 medals, including 3 golds, before his home fans at the Sydney Olympics, and he was even better in Japan. The headline at the top of the paper that day read simply, Teenage stars Thorpe and Phelps break records. Wow, what the heck was I doing in the same headline as Ian Thorpe? He was the man. I was just the kid. As soon as I saw the headline, I remember saying, wow, he's like all world, more like all worldly. On the other hand, Ian and I were very similar. Ian finished the meet in Japan with 6 golds. Many people saw Ian as the person who is carrying the torch for international swimming, both in and out of the pool. I didn't talk to him much during Japan, but on the flight back to the States, I thought a lot about how I wanted to be able to do something to make people pay more attention to the sport in the US, the way Ian had done in Australia. We used Ian as a model. During that meet, Bob went up to Ian's coach, Doug Frost, and asked if he could pick his brain. Doug was very helpful. He talked to Bob about how Ian learned how to handle the press, how he recovered from races, and when, during his training cycle, he would travel to altitude. Bob saw Ian as a prototype of a swimmer I could be. He was a great example to follow. So Greg, we've talked in several episodes about the power of having a rival.
This is definitely a rival, but I think it also gives him someone to learn from. And when you're going to learn, you might as well learn from the best. Who's already done it? How did they do it? We finish every episode of Performers, Duncan, with our top 10 lists, and we say that success leaves clues. For Phelps, Ian Thorpe, the Torpedo, one of the great nicknames in sport, he represented not just a competitor but also a real benchmark of excellence, and fueled it as a source of motivation. The admiration I think Michael had pushed him to set higher goals and strive for the same level of impact and recognition. Remember, he described Ian Thorpe as a national hero. So he's learning from the best by adopting his best practices and learning from them, and from his successes and from his setbacks. So that eagerness that he's got to have a national impact really showcases that level of ambition that he's got and the vision that he has. We talked about those strict or lofty goals that he set with Bob. He wants to be a big impact in swimming in the US, and it really embodies the desire to leave probably a lasting legacy and contribute to the growth and the popularity of the sport. And having those kind of thoughts, even at such a young age, can be a very, very powerful motivator.
You're absolutely right. And we hear in this section more about his ambition to change the sport of swimming. And he's turning pro a month into his junior year of high school, and he signs with Speedo. Becoming pro in a junior in high school is pretty crazy. And he says, at some point, Peter, who was his agent, turned to me and asked, "So what do you want for the future, Michael? What are your goals?" I looked around and saw everyone staring at me. I said the first thing that came to my mind. "I want to change the sport of swimming," I told them. That sounds like a boastful statement, but I didn't mean it to reflect on me as much as the sport. In Australia, I saw swimming as the lead segment on the evening news, the lead topic on talk radio. Swimmers are on billboards, in commercials. Kids see them and want to be like them. When kids bug their parents about things they want to do, they want to jump in the pool. That's great for swimming, and that's what swimming should be in the United States. I want to change the sport of swimming. I want people to talk about it, think about it, and look forward to seeing it. I want them to want to jump in and do it. That's my goal. Greg, there's a saying, kind of restock the stream you fish from, which really is about giving back to others. And his goal here is, as a junior in high school, he wants to change the sport of swimming and have impact on future generations.
It looks like he's recognizing the magnitude of the moment that he's in. You really only get one, maybe two opportunities to redefine an entire sport. And if you think about who his role model is, we're talking about Mark Spitz, and that was 1972, right? So there's a big time gap here between the last really big rock star type person for swimming in the United States. So this is a real moment, and the fact that he's recognizing this as a junior in high school, as you say, first of all, it's wild that he's in this position as a junior, but to have the maturity and perhaps the foresight that this is a pivotal moment, but having a clear and pretty well articulated vision of what he wants this to be, I think that's really impressive.
And kind of transitioning a little bit, we're going to talk a little bit more about this rivalry with Ian Thorpe, because this is really what put swimming on the map, and especially Michael Phelps early in his career. And he says, "So to set the record straight about Ian Thorpe, nobody admires what Ian has accomplished more than I do. I am envious every time I see him swim freestyle, because his stroke is powerful and effortless, and it is the blueprint for me when I swim freestyle events, as it should be for every other freestyler in the world. Second, I have always admired the way Ian has conducted himself, given all the attention he has received. I am only now starting to understand what it has been like for him for the past several years, ever since he was just 15, because of the way Australians regard swimming. He is never flustered, and he always seems to know what to say and how to handle himself. Because of Ian, fans in Australia can admire swimming even more than they did 10 or 15 years ago. He has taken a sport that was already number one in the country and moved it forward, which is a tremendous accomplishment. I have a strong desire to race against him and try to beat him because of how much I respect him. To compete in any race with Ian in the field is the ultimate, but it has always been competitive, not personal. I thrive on whatever will motivate me, whether it is another swimmer's presence or someone else's words. So I measure myself against him, not to put him down, but to lift my performance up. That's as high a compliment as I can pay to any other swimmer." Greg, we've talked about rivalries quite a lot and their facilitative effects. Is there anything worth adding here?
Well, we are definitely hearing more and more about this rivalry, and it does, I think, come with a lot of admiration. So sometimes rivalries can be perceived as a source of animosity, that sort of villain and hero type thing. But for Michael Phelps, Ian Thorpe really embodies the ideal competitor. That's someone who possesses a certain prowess and a demeanor that really sets a benchmark for him to strive towards. So his desire to race against Thorpe, it really comes from a will to not diminish him, but recognize the heights that he represents, and gives Phelps something to aspire to. It's a real aspirational target. And the dynamic between them really illustrates how this rivalry can foster a spirit of uplifting for both of these athletes, where each competitor's success provides that feeding into that cycle, and really forces them to reach new levels of achievement. I think we've seen this in other sports, maybe Nadal, Federer. That's another example of fierce competitors who truly and honestly like and respect each other. We might, go back in time and think about Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, Arnold Palmer, Jack Nicklaus. I think if you unpick a lot of different sports, we're going to see very, very similar rivalries as we do here.
So, jumping ahead to the 2003 World Championships, he says, I knew the World Championships in Barcelona were going to be a different meet than the Olympics or my first Worlds, where I only had one race. This time I was looking up at 6 events, 2 IMs, 2 butterflies, and 2 relays. It was a great dry run for a crowded schedule that I might be looking at in Athens, and each day Bob had everything figured out to the minute. When I would warm up, warm down, take my laps, get my lactate test, have snacks between races, his paranoia and my swimming would really be put to its first big test. There is a fine line between confidence, which is necessary, and cockiness, which is dangerous. And on the day of the 100-meter butterfly final, both of us crossed over it. I was over at the practice pool joking around with Stephen Penfold, one of the Australian freestylers, and I was way too loose. I rarely get on the blocks without some feeling of nerves or a sense that I might give less than my best effort once I hear the starter's beep. I didn't feel threatened enough or nervous enough. When I jumped on the blocks in lane 4, in the lane to my left, my teammate Ian Crocker was bouncing on the blocks with the same sort of reserved emotion I had the night before.
Duncan, I want to linger there on that sentence. I didn't feel threatened enough or nervous enough. I think what he's talking about here is what we term activation, which is kind of that physiological sense that you know that you're ready. Now, when he's talking about that he wasn't nervous enough, that's usually what we call an appraisal of that level of activation. So it's sort of like the sense that we make out of it. So the way that your body's responding, you can look at it in a couple of different ways. If you're feeling kind of tense and maybe a little bit adrenalized, some people could see that as nerves, other people might view that as excitement. But for him, he knows that ideal state that he wants to be going into a race for. So when he's standing on the block and he doesn't feel threatened or nervous enough, he doesn't feel like he's got that level of activation. Physically, it doesn't sound like he's in the right place to perform, but also, and perhaps even more, mentally, it certainly doesn't sound like he's in the right place to perform at his best.
Yeah, that's an excellent take on this paragraph. And during the race, he says, I don't think I paid as much attention to Ian Crocker as I should have. He hit the turn in 23.99, well ahead of me at 24.61. I took the result for granted as we hit the wall. I looked up and saw my time, 51.10, which was faster than my world record from the day before. I also glanced at Ian's time, thought that I had seen it at 51.98 next to his name, and started pumping my fist. Only after I took off my goggles did I see that I had misread the board. If Ian had been the type to let loose with a big celebration, I might have realized it sooner, but he was smiling, shrugging, and throwing his head back in disbelief. The 51.98 was actually 50.98. Not only had Ian won the race, he had broken the world record. The point was, Ian prepared for the race better than I did. He executed better, and he deserved the victory and the record more than I did. After the race, I sat by the side of the pool, and Bob talked quietly in my ear for 10 minutes or so that nobody else could hear. You need to think about which Michael Phelps they'll see at the press conference, he told me. Are you going to pout, or be a champion. When I left, Bob lifted my spirits by saying, "Better here than next summer. Remember, you get another chance at it." Honestly, at that point, I was still seething inside, but the thoughts of another chance would drive me and push me incessantly over the next 12 months. So Greg, he's definitely underestimated his opponent here.
Absolutely. And you've said in previous episodes, there is simply no benefit from underestimating anyone. And of course, feeling too relaxed, as I said earlier, maybe a little bit overly confident. This can lead to a lack of focus and that necessary physical arousal or physical activation to perform at your best. The key takeaway here is that a healthy amount of nervousness channeled in the right direction and a respect for your competition and the competitors in front of you, that is paramount. It drives your preparation, it sharpens your focus, it ensures that you bring your best to every single challenge. It really is a facilitative moment.
So for context for the listeners, he lost this final and he's saying this defeat is going to push me incessantly over the next 12 months. The reality was he finished the World Championships with 4 gold medals, 2 silver medals, and also broke 5 world records.
Yeah, to be honest, that probably softened the blow. But the greats can be happy with their performance, but never satisfied with it.
So after an amazing World Championships, he is up for a Speedo contract renewal. I think you've had one of those before.
Mine was just more of a modelling contract. It wasn't anything in the pool. It was more around the pool.
Maybe we'll put a link in the show notes to your Speedo modelling shoot.
Those web pages have all been removed.
My agent wanted to generate some buzz with a new agreement, not only for me, but also for the sport. And how could he do that when Barry Bonds was making $20 million a year and swimming doesn't usually draw the attention that some of the 4 major sports do in the United States? He came up with a somewhat radical proposal for Stuart Isaac, who was in charge of Speedo's team of athletes. If I were to win 7 gold medals at either of the next 2 Olympics, Speedo would have to pay me a $1 million bonus for equaling Mart Spitz's record for gold medals at one Olympic set in 1972. It's funny because only the $1 million provision was publicized. People assumed that I wouldn't be paid unless I won $1 million, which made the story more dramatic. The contract was actually set at a graduated scale, so that I could still earn a bonus for 6 gold medals, or 5, for instance, and also for world records. Importantly, it included guaranteed money for the next 5 years, when I was planning to go to school, live on my own, and start saving for the future. But the idea of $1 million was new to swimming, and we figured good for swimming. We knew the chances of winning 7 golds against the world competition, as deep and as balanced as it is these days, would be slim, but not impossible. Peter and I talked about it and asked ourselves some important questions. Are we setting ourselves up for increased pressure? Yes. Can we handle the pressure? Yes. Will it create a buzz for swimming? Yes. So let's do it.
Duncan, I think it's interesting that in our very first episode of Performers, talking about Andre Agassi, and if you haven't listened to that episode, it's a great one to go back and get your feet wet in. Agassi was really vilified for his endorsement deals, if you can remember, particularly with Canon. Can you remember what that slogan was for Canon?
Image is everything.
Image is everything. One of the greats. But here we've got something that's designed to create buzz around the sport. And I was sort of wondering and wrestling with this a little bit. Is it a double standard as maybe Phelps was liked and seen as kind of a rather wholesome all-American boy, and Andre Agassi wasn't particularly liked? He was seen as a little bit of a villain and definitely vilified. I don't know if there's a real answer to that. But I think Phelps's willingness to embrace this promotion and take this challenge on, knowing that he's got the tools and the capabilities to handle the pressure and deal with all of these things, and yet leverage those external expectations as a motivational force, really shows that he can deal with these high levels of performance.
So as we mentioned, the pressure is mounting on Phelps, as are the expectations. So part of Coach Bob's response to this is to kind of do what we would call a bit of stress inoculation, and I'd love your take on this. Bob wanted to put me through some stress when we were at the Melbourne meet. He deliberately asked for the driver who was scheduled to pick us up to show up late, so I would have to spend more time waiting at the pool. He made sure a couple of the meals I ordered weren't quite right. Bob thinks of everything, and he wanted me to acclimate myself to being able to react calmly when something didn't go according to plan. That way, if it happened again when I was at the Olympic trials in Long Beach or at the Olympics themselves in Athens, I would know how to work around a problem because I had dealt with it before.
I think this might be apocryphal, to be perfectly honest, but I think I also heard a story about Michael Phelps having to swim with maybe with water in his goggles, basically to train him for if that happened within a race. And I want to feel like the story that I've heard, it did indeed happen in a race. Guess what? He could deal with it and he won the race. There we go. Nothing to do with being the fastest swimmer in the world by a mile. Just he was able to swim with goggles, whatever. But to kind of go back to what Bob's doing here, expertise really is about knowing what to focus on and what to ignore in the moment. You've used the phrase keep the main thing, and that's really what this is. But it's being able to deal with distraction. It's being able to deal with circumstances that are out of your control, but still being able to focus on what's important in that moment. What's the task asking of me? Have I got the capabilities? Have I practiced this in some shape, form, or fashion? Am I a problem solver? And can I go out there and execute? It seems like a bit of a nefarious way to do it by changing up meal plans and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, that's what he's trying to get out of him here. Can you be a problem solver? And can you perform when circumstances aren't absolutely 100% ideal?
So, probably unsurprisingly, his coach is messing with his food and all the rest of it. There's a bit of a rocky period between the two of them. And he says, things were rocky between Bob and me for a 10-day period. It was a game of how much stress can you take? How much can I manufacture? And he was playing the game very hard. We both sort of knew we'd be on each other's case for a while, and we also knew it was something we needed to do to be able to push each other as far as we could. In the 4 years between the Athens and Sydney Olympics, I probably took 4 or 5 days off, and none of those were holidays. Greg, I've used this maxim before that excellence is the capacity to take pain. Physically and mentally, they're pushing each other to the absolute brink. But perhaps, is this what it takes to be the very best?
There's definitely is. We talked about earlier this idea of reciprocity. It's a give and take here, and it seems like they're pushing each other's buttons. But you've got to remember, for me and you, the Olympic Games are every 4 years. But for Olympians, it's every day.
I love that saying. So I think we've seen this with a couple of other of our performers, but Michael really does get motivated from different external sources. And he says, I use whatever I can to motivate myself. Tell me I can't do something, and it's like a lighted match next to a fuel tanker. I don't throw goggles anymore, but I always keep an internal tanker at the ready position. In December, Swimming World magazine, a very respected publication within the sport, put out an issue that contained the cover headline, Super Flyer. It was a picture of Ian Crocker strumming a guitar and leaning back against his car. It also contained a 2-page fold-out centerfold of Ian swimming the fly. Don't get me wrong, not only do I respect Ian as a swimmer, but I like him personally. That didn't stop me from ripping out that centerfold picture of him and putting it on my wall above my bed. Every morning when I woke up, I had to see a photo of Ian, and it was like a double espresso and a kick in the butt put together. If I wanted to be on the next cover and have the next centerfold, I had to get up that morning and train so I wouldn't lose a game. So my first reaction to this, Greg, is I don't know that Michael Phelps had many girlfriends at the time. He had a swimmer posted above his bed that he would look up to every morning. We have talked about other performers using their rivals as external motivators. I think in particular Agassi in episode 1 with Pete Sampras and Kobe Bryant, who in episode 8 basically had everybody was his rival. This approach seems to work for some people.
Yeah, motivation's an interesting thing, and we can say, or maybe not say, one is better than the other, internal versus external. There's a time and a place for each one. Internal motivation is probably going to be a little bit more slow burning and a little bit longer sustainable. External motivators tend to be a little bit more short term and perhaps a little bit more almost like gasoline on a fire. It's going to burn very, very quickly. But for me, what's really important here for any performer is to is to maybe build a set of different wells that you can go to in any given moment. So maybe my intrinsic motivation well isn't really as full as it needs to be. What's something I can go to that maybe is external, short term? Maybe it's a very specific race or a very specific rival or a very specific game or thing, presentation, whatever it is at work, that I can just go to in that moment and get the motivation from there, knowing that the internal stuff is going to come back at some point, but knowing that I'm not just tied to a single place where I get my motivation from. I can go to different parts, almost like a buffet, if you can imagine what that is in your mind. Go to these different places and get that motivation from there. Having that really strong collective sort of places to go, really, really powerful, really used for athletes. And I strongly suggest all of our listeners consider and develop those different wells to be able to go to.
I love the idea of a buffet. I've never heard that one from you before.
Don't we? You've heard me talk about buffets before. Come on, you've known me long enough for that.
So Greg, a little bit about his high performance team and those that are closest to him. He says, Peter and Bob made a great team. Peter negotiated many great opportunities for me, and Bob made sure the opportunities didn't detract from my training schedule. All along we had to ask, was the media exposure adversely affecting my training? Peter ran everything through Bob, who had veto power over everything. They came up with the scale of importance, and I started to get a lot of requests, especially as the Olympics drew closer. With every photo shoot, interview request, press conference, and TV appearance, Bob would ask Peter, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would this benefit Michael?
There's a slightly different feel here to Mike Tyson's experience of Don King, who he called, to be honest, I'm not going to tell you what he called. It's up to our listeners to go back and listen to the Mike Tyson episode and have a listen to what he calls Don King. It's a little bit later on in the story, but it's quite illuminating. But what we're seeing here is, and we've seen this from a number of different performers in previous episodes, he's starting to put a high performance team around himself, those people that can deal with some of the external variables. And I really like this idea of, let's keep the athlete at the center. Is this beneficial for Michael? Not what's he going to get out of it in terms of fame and fortune and press and coverage, but is this going to be beneficial for what he's actually trying to achieve?
And Greg, there's actually two performers in this story. As we've mentioned Michael a lot, but Coach Bauman himself is a performer. He's getting a lot of recognition, and Bob is offered the head coaching job at the University of Michigan, which has a very well-renowned swim program. And he says, if I took the job, what would you do? I answered him in about 2 seconds, but I knew the question was coming, and I had my answer ready for him before he even asked. Are you kidding? I would go anywhere you would be, I told him. I like challenges, and I used to wear the Michigan cap at school. It was more than that. No other coach could have gotten me as far as Bob. It was more than his degree in developmental psych that allowed him to plow through my attitude and get the most out of my talent. It was a brilliant mind and a great heart that he probably didn't want anybody to know about. Bob and I had always been careful not to express too much emotion towards each other because, with my dad rarely in the picture, I relied on him for the kind of counsel a father gives a son. In our moments when we weren't yelling at each other, we talked about school, friends, family, girls, music, anything. We didn't see eye to eye on a lot of it. I will never like country music, but he knew and I knew that he had done more than mold me into a swimmer. He had helped me grow up, and there were days when I needed a lot of help. I liked Ann Arbor, and I admired Michigan's tradition. But if Bob had accepted a job in Siberia, my decision would have been the same. Greg, coaches wear many hats. I think it's really interesting how Bob played this kind of pseudo-father figure role to Michael, but was really careful not to cross the line, as it seems.
Coaches do wear different hats, and Bob's relationship with Michael is a real testament to the profound impact that a coach can actually have on an athlete's life. But he's got to be very conscious here of balancing those roles very, very carefully. So Bob provided the guidance and discipline needed for Michael to excel in swimming, but he also offered personal support that maybe Michael lacked from his own father and sort of filled that void, as it were.
So jumping ahead to the Olympic trials for Athens in 2004, he says, the day before competition began, I was up at the podium giving a press conference. The first question was about how I was able to go into a meet like this with so much confidence. In fact, I was a lot more nervous than I let on. This was what all the training and sacrifice was leading to. It was one thing to go to nationals or an invitational meet, thinking about trying to break a record. Miss it and you can break it again next month. But these were the Olympic trials, and they were very different from the 2000 trials in Indianapolis when I was an unknown. Everyone was watching me now, either expecting me to do well or hoping for me to fail. Greg, I'm going to read that last sentence again. Everyone was watching me now, either expecting me to do well or hoping for me to fail. What are your thoughts on this internal narrative he has going into the Olympic trials? I'm not sure it's the most healthy.
Well, I think part of it is healthy, and I'm actually going to give some advice that you once upon a time gave me, and that was before I was given a best man speech. It must have been my brother's wedding. I think was the first best man speech I gave, and you said you can be confident because you're walking into a room where everyone's hoping that you succeed. And that's really quite a freeing thing. It's probably one of the more profound things you've actually ever said.
Absolutely.
You've said some garbage before, but that was actually pretty good. And it stuck with me because of the quality. But anyway, the first half of that, everyone was watching me now, either expecting me to do well or really hoping for him to do well. I like that, and I've actually used that idea with athletes that I've worked with. You're walking into an environment, particularly if you're playing a home game or in a sort of a home environment, people really, really want you to succeed here. And that can be a really freeing thought and give you a lot of confidence going in any pressure-filled situation.
So as we've mentioned, there's been a lot of comparisons between Phelps and Spitz. And he says, there aren't many things that can make me shake. I mean literally shake. But I could feel goosebumps all the way up and down my arms and legs. He pulled my head down to wish me well. I'll be over in Athens to watch you, he said, and I'm behind you all the way. I know what you're going through. I went through it once before. Enjoy it. Have fun with it. Go get them. That was amazing. I walked away and needed some time to just process the whole thing. He's the greatest icon in the sport, and it was like he was passing the torch to me. Very, very cool. So this is just a moment where Spitz presents him with the medal at the Olympic trials. Really cool.
It is a very cool moment, and the comparison between him and Mark Spitz and the pressure that can come with that highlights probably a unique aspect of Michael Phelps' journey here. So being constantly measured against a, let's face it, legendary figure, it can be both an honour but also a heavy burden as well. And that idea of comparison, that can be a double-edged sword. On one hand, it sets a really high benchmark that can drive an athlete's performance forward and kind of inspire them to surpass their limits and achieve extraordinary things. But on the other hand, it can create really immense stress and expectations that are difficult to manage. And we saw this with Dan Carter. He talked about the weight of the all-black jersey in rugby and the sort of the greats that had come before. But one thing that I want to pick up on here is the notion of confidence, in particular when we're breaking down confidence, when we're working with athletes. One of the components is something that we call verbal persuasion. So that's basically being told that you can do something. Now, what's really important about that verbal persuasion is the source of it. So who is giving you that verbal persuasion? And the particular thing that's interesting is the more expertise that person has, the more weight that whatever it is they tell you is going to carry. So obviously, Mark Spitz, the guy who's been there and done this, and the kind of the person that Phelps is trying to emulate in a way here, is in fact the persuader. So the fact that he has this expertise and this experience and says, listen, I've been through it once, enjoy it, have fun, go get him, that's got to be a massive confidence builder for Phelps here.
And you mentioned expectations, and there are a lot of expectations from others that don't hold kind of the status that Spitz does. And he says, I always go into big races at big events looking to swim against Michael Phelps. What has he done before? What is he capable of doing? I didn't look at the race as a failure because I finished second to Aaron. I know I could have swum it faster. After the race, I went to a press conference and some of the questions about falling short and failing. I felt I had succeeded. I had gotten stronger as the trials progressed. I guess it was just a matter of people's expectations. I had just become the first person to ever qualify for the US Olympic team in any sport in 6 individual events. Yet I had been beaten twice and I had recorded a personal best time in only one event, the 400 IM. Bob and I had set a very high bar. Now the question was, how high did we want to set it for the Olympics? We had all of 24 hours to decide for sure, since USA Swimming needed to finalize its roster. We knew it was an either or between the 200 free and the 200 back. Even though the backstroke was a pretty safe medal, I told Bob for the last time that I really wanted a chance to race against Ian Thorpe. Done. In with the freestyle, out with the backstroke. Greg, I love this section. He's not buying into this media narrative that he had failed because he didn't win 2 races, and he's instead writing his own story in his head. And lastly, I love the fact that he wants to race Thorpe. He's not picking, quote unquote, an easy medal at the Olympics. He's actually picking a challenge. Ducking opponents at the highest levels has always seemed really strange to me.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. That idea of avoiding the top competitors in your sport, it's for him in this situation, it might provide a safe path to medals. For a boxer, it might be, you get to keep your belts for a little bit longer. You stay at the top of the game by avoiding those fights. But it contradicts the essence of, well, what I would consider to be true sportsmanship and that real desire for personal growth. I've worked with golfers in the past that really want to hit every fairway in regulation. And I've always said to them, if you want to do that, just pull your pitching wedge out and chip it down the fairway. You're going to hit every fairway in regulation, usually, but it's not going to set you up for success and really showcase what it is you can do. But by seeking out the toughest challenges, really what he's doing here is he's exemplifying that spirit of what a true competitor is, someone that's not just interested in winning, but proving and testing himself against the highest standards. And in this situation, that's his old rival, Ian Thorpe.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm going to jump to that race itself. In Athens 2004, it's the finals of the 200 free. And he says, the next evening, we had the finals of the 200 free. The race some people said I shouldn't try and swim. Why take on something like this with an easier option available? See, if I could be really good at other sports, I'd want to pitch at Barry Bonds, guard Michael Jordan, sidestep Ray Lewis, or stop Wayne Gretzky when they're at their best. I might not succeed, but I won't want to spend my career training every day without measuring myself against the best. That's why I wanted to swim this race. I wanted to leave the pool knowing that I had swum my best race against my own expectations and against someone I respect as much as Ian Thorpe. The point of competition isn't always to take the easiest way out, but to meet the biggest challenge. I love it when people tell me I can't do something because it fires me up to prove them wrong. I wanted to race Ian in a freestyle event before either of us retired. So in the race itself, Phelps finishes third behind Ian Thorpe and one of my favourite swimmers' name of all time, Peter van den Hoogenbaan from the Netherlands. I always loved that name. And, what I love here, Greg, I think it emulates what you had just said. Like, he's all about approaching the biggest challenges and not trying to avoid failure.
That word challenge is really important here because some people could see, some performers could see this as a threat, something that is, against them or their capabilities or something that's really challenging their position on the mountain, as it were. But what Phelps is showing here is a real challenge mindset, seeing these as obstacles. Hey, listen, if I want to be the best, I've got to beat the best. And those two certainly are that. And I think that this really highlights the intrinsic value of seeking out those tough challenges. And that's a champion's mindset for me, where the goal is not merely to win, but to achieve your best performance against the highest possible benchmarks in your performance domain. So that third place finish in this context, that is more than a significant achievement, because really what it does is it marks his willingness to step out of his comfort zone, confront the greatest challenges that he can possibly face in that moment head on. And for me, this attitude of embracing those challenges, fueled by external doubts and internal aspirations, this is a key driver of sustained success, and that's how you build a legacy in sport.
Yeah, really great reflection, Greg. And jumping ahead, we've talked a lot about Michael being an individual competitor and how great he is, but he was also a really good teammate. And I think there's a section here I couldn't help but not share it. And it's really about a moment where he sacrifices himself for his team and a specific teammate. Usually the swimmers who recorded the second fastest times for us in each stroke would be able to swim in the qualifying heats. Only those 4 swimmers who swam in the final would be able to stand on the awards podium afterwards and receive their medals before hearing the winning team's national anthem. But the ones who had swam in the prelims would receive medals after the fact for their team's performance. So if you swam in the prelims, even if you didn't swim in the final for the team, you would get a medal. But you had to swim, obviously, in one of them. So what happens is Phelps beats Ian Crocker in the butterfly final, meaning that Phelps had swam in the prelims and now had earned a spot in the final of the 4x100, which means his teammate didn't swim and would not get a medal. So he's in a really interesting spot here, and he says, I could see how disappointed Ian was after the race. It hit me that because he hadn't swum in the morning, he was going to leave Athens without a gold medal. This didn't seem right to me. As much as I used my losses to Ian to motivate me over the last year, I felt an old kinship with this guy behind the poster on my wall. He pushed me. If he hadn't been that good, he couldn't have pushed me that hard. If I didn't respect him as much, I might not have trained that hard in the butterfly. He swam for a while before I came over to tell him I wanted him to take my spot on the relay. Ian was surprised and humbled. He went over to Eddie and told him he didn't feel like taking a spot he felt he didn't earn. Eventually agreed and was too speechless to tell me much more than thank you. He seemed a little confused at first, but I could tell he was excited to have another chance. So Greg, this phrase, being an elite teammate, I think for me this is a profound example of sportsmanship, kind of camaraderie and leadership. It really demonstrates that true greatness in sports isn't just about personal achievements, but it's also about recognizing and supporting teammates.
This feels like it's straight out of a Disney movie. If Disney ever do a swimming movie and this is what they choose to focus on, like this is going to be the big ending of it. But you're right. It's in moments like these that probably the true character of a champion is revealed, and by prioritizing the team's success and giving his teammate Ian a chance to shine. What Michael's done here is he's reinforced the value of collective achievement over personal glory, which isn't something that you can often do in an individual sport like swimming. But this decision undoubtedly it's strengthened the bond within the team, and I think it's really set a powerful example of what integrity and generosity should look like for athletes everywhere.
And obviously Michael stepped aside. Ian swam in the final. The US win gold. Michael does get a gold medal himself. He finishes the Olympics with 6 gold medals, 2 bronze medals, and he'd become only the second Olympic athlete in history to win a total of 8 medals, which is pretty amazing. But when we're talking about medals, he has a really nice reflection on it here, and I'd love your take. He says, medals are really only important if you can think about what it took to get them in the first place. If I hadn't been the kid who couldn't focus, had big ears, watched his parents split up, saw his sister struggle, and couldn't go more than 2 minutes without arguing with a coach, the medals would still be the same size and colour, but maybe either they wouldn't be mine or wouldn't mean as much as they do now. So the medals will find their place. I'm not worried about them. I wouldn't have medals if I hadn't had dreams first. The best part about waking up, after all, is remembering how sweet the dreams actually were. Greg, medals in their essence are a tangible representation of intangible qualities like hard work, dedication, and perseverance.
In their most base form, they're just chunks of metal, chunks of material, right? They're meaningless without the struggle that it took to get them. And I really love that reflection that medals will find their place. That's a mature outlook in terms of where the physical awards are actually secondary to the memories and the lessons that he's learned along the way, and the struggles and the battles and the challenges and the obstacles and how he's been able to overcome them. And it's a real reminder that success, it isn't just about the end result, but it's about the dreams that inspire us, the obstacles that we overcome, and the just general continuous pursuit of excellence. That's what it's all about.
And because Michael had such a successful Olympics with 8 medals total, 6 golds, he is growing the sport. They do a kind of post Olympics tour, visiting lots of different countries and lots of different cities within the US, and really generate a kind of buzz behind swimming that I don't think US swimming has ever had before. There's also a key moment after the Olympics, unfortunately, and it's an incident that occurred and probably pretty well documented. He gets a DUI, and this is something that shakes him quite a bit. He struggles afterwards, struggles in 2005 with his results. And it's really, he feels like he's, heavily let down his mum. And I think the point for me with Phelps in this situation, and definitely obviously not endorsing DUIs, but he's human and he just made a really bad mistake.
Yeah, you can choose your actions, but you can't choose the consequences of those actions. And we have seen this pop up with a couple of other performers as well, that they find themselves in these circumstances and maybe do certain things to excess. So certainly not a unique story, but a sad one nonetheless.
So again, jumping ahead to the next World Championships in 2007, it's in Australia, in Melbourne, and he says, I felt great going into Worlds, knowing that since the last ones in Montreal, I'd accomplished the little things I needed to do to get better. As if I needed more motivation, Australian coach Don Talbot, who usually has the words to provide some, told a Melbourne newspaper that Ian Thorpe's accomplishments still outranked mine. Thorpe's still number one in my opinion, Talbot said. Phelps doesn't outdo him yet. With 2 swims left on the last night, I had a chance to win 8 gold medals. Since the 400 IM was one of my better events, and since our medley relay team really would be enormous favourites, they talked as if it was in the bags. But I didn't believe that. I never believe there is something I can't do if I work at it, but I also don't take anything for granted. I use the familiar poker analogy that if you're holding pocket aces, the guy next to you can outdraw you with a 7 deuce. I knew anything could happen the next evening. I didn't realize that something would actually happen before the late session started. So here's an opportunity to get 8 gold medals. In the medley race, one of his teammates has an early start. They get disqualified, but he does go on to win the 400 IM. And he says, so I had won my 7th gold medal. Even if I hadn't done it at the Olympics, I had climbed a huge mountain. The Olympics were 16 months away, and they couldn't get here fast enough. So, Greg, he's at the World Championships and 7 gold medals. They're saying, like, be at your best when your best is needed. That's pretty remarkable. To add context here, 7 gold medals and 5 world records at the World Championships.
Sounds like a nice, easy day at the office. I think this is what Olympic cycles and periodization all build towards. It's about peaking at the right time and making sure you're at your best going into the most important competitions.
So, going into Beijing 2008, when reporters asked Mark Spitz what it'd be like if I won 7 gold medals in Beijing, he told them, second man on the moon. When they asked what it would be like if I won 8, he responded, first man on Mars. But of course, leave it to Bob to grab the article that would set me off like a rocket. Bob was scheming, knowing that somehow he can always count on the Australians to fire me up. He read an article in an Australian newspaper and was determined not just to show it to me, but to let it get to me. He neatly underlined all the relevant parts of the story he thought I could use for motivation. The article quotes Ian Thorpe, who was asked about my prospects of winning 7 or 8 gold medals in Beijing. Thorpe said, I don't think he'll do it, but I'd love to see it, Ian says. There's a thing called competition. There won't just be one athlete competing, and in a lot of events he has strong competition. I then took the article and taped it to my locker. Whenever I looked inside the locker each morning after arriving at the pool, the underlined story is the very first thing I see. If I'm dragging trying to accomplish what I need to do, I think about Gran. So his Gran had died early in the year. There's a little bit of motivation for context there, Greg. It seems a little bit out of the ordinary.
Probably don't laugh when you're talking about his dead grandma.
Yeah, sorry about that. But he seeks motivation from his dead grandma and Ian's words.
Oh, sorry. Don't know why I found that so funny.
Horrible person. So jumping ahead. So he says, then I train a little harder. I'm grateful for the doubters and believers. And I'm especially grateful for my wonderful family, friends, and supporters of the amazing sport who have given me a chance to turn doubters into believers. And that is where we'll leave it today.
You're joking, aren't you? What about the rest of it?
So for context, this version of the book that I read does stop just before the Beijing Olympics, which is a horrible place to stop. But of course, if you followed anything about the Phelps story, he goes to the Beijing Olympics in 2008, where he wins 8 gold medals, sets 7 world records, and 1 Olympic record. For context, he then adds 4 gold medals, 2 silver medals to his roster in the Olympic Games in London 2012. He then goes to the Rio Olympics in 2016, which a lot of people didn't think he would make. He solidified his legacy by capturing 5 more gold medals, 1 silver medal, which again takes his final total to 28 Olympic medals, overall 23 gold medals. It's simply mind-blowing. So Greg, success leaves clues. So what are your top 10 life lessons from Beneath the Surface by Michael Phelps?
That is indeed a lot of success. That's a lot of hardware right there. So let's jump in. Top 10 life lessons from Beneath the Surface by Michael Phelps. Number 1, set clear goals. Having a specific goal keeps you focused and motivated. 1 gold medal. That's what I thought about since 1992. Number 2, commit to your dreams. Dedication to your dreams can help you achieve even the loftiest goals. Every time reporters ask me about tying or breaking Mark Spitzer's record of 7 gold medals at one Olympics, I'd keep reminding them that it was my dream to win 1 gold medal. Number 3, practice visualization. Visualizing success can help you prepare mentally for the challenges. Number 4, value process over outcome. Enjoying the process is as important as the end goal. Once I figured out how to swim, I felt so free. It was like I had this new toy that my sisters enjoyed all this time. I went to the pool every day and it usually took a while to get me to leave. Number 5, turn challenges into motivation. Use obstacles as fuel to drive your success. He says, tell me I can't do something and it's like a lighted match next to a fuel tanker. Number 6, find constructive outlets for frustration. Channel your frustration into productive actions. Number 7, stay resilient, especially during adversity. Perseverance in the face of adversity strengthens character. He says, I was a hyperactive kid who loved being with his friends and his family, but I still caused trouble for everyone. Number 8, surround yourself with supportive people. Supportive relationships can help you navigate life's challenges. He says, people in swimming made me feel I could fit in. That was important because even though I had a lot of friends at school, some things could make me pretty sensitive. Number 9, embrace discipline and hard work. Consistent effort and discipline are key to success. He says, Bob scared me. I remember the first set he gave us, a 400 freestyle, a 4x100 stroke, 1 400 IM, and a 4x100 freestyle. I did each set 3 times. I remembered it because it hurt. Number 10, leverage external motivation. External challenges can push you to excel. He says, when reporters asked Mark Spitz what it would be like if I won 7 gold medals in Beijing, he told them, second man on the moon. When they asked what it would be like if I won 8, he responded, first man on Mars.
Greg, another fantastic top 10, as I like to say. And we can always learn from people's stories by identifying the behaviors to avoid on our own path to mastery. As Charlie Munger likes to say, all I want to know is where I'm going to die, so I'll never go there.
Beautiful. Here we go. Number 1, being overconfident. That overconfidence can lead to underperformance and missed opportunities. He says there's a fine line between confidence, which is necessary, and cockiness, which is dangerous. Number 2, letting success lead to complacency. Continuous improvement is necessary even after achieving success. He says, it was a wake-up call, a slap in the face. I had a lot of work to do. Number 3, compromising your integrity. Maintain your integrity and honesty in all situations, regardless of the pressure. He says, she wanted to raise a son who did the right thing. This was one time, more than any other in my life, I had let her down. Number 4, avoid overtraining and burnout. Adequate rest and recovery is vital for physical and mental readiness. In the 4 years between the Athens and Sydney Olympics, I probably took 4 or 5 days off, and none of those were holidays. Number 5, avoiding conflict resolution. Unresolved conflicts can damage relationships and hinder progress. He says, silent treatment between Bob and I could last days. Number 6, suppressing emotions. Bottling up those emotions can lead to unhealthy outbursts later. Number 7, relying solely on external motivation. Depending only on external motivation can lead to short-term focus and long-term dissatisfaction. He says, every morning when I woke up, I had to see the photo of Ian and it was like a double espresso and a kick in the butt put together. Number 8, neglecting the importance of balance. Focusing solely on your career goals without maintaining a healthy balance can lead to personal dissatisfaction. He says, I'd miss family events and holidays, and looking back, I realised how important those moments were. Number 9, allowing negative feedback to define you. Letting negative feedback affect your self-worth can undermine your confidence and performance. He said, when I saw Bob afterwards, I told him, I want to put a bag over my head. And finally, number 10, letting fear and anxiety take over. Allowing fear and anxiety to dominate your thoughts can hinder your performance and your personal growth. He says, I remember being so nervous before a race that I couldn't focus. Thank you so much for joining myself and Duncan on this episode. If you enjoyed it, we ask just one thing. Share this episode with 2 people in your network. And for that, we're truly grateful. See you all next time on Performers.